think we'll officially start. Hello, everyone. Lovely to see you all today. Thank you for coming along. I know everyone's time is so precious at the minute, so thanks for taking the time to share it with us today. I'm Jane. I'm the membership manager here at Social Enterprise Scotland, and as we've just ascertained, my colleague Amy here is here from the membership team also. The intent today is to keep it as informal as possible, but I'll just cover our tried and tested Zoom rules first. So if you can keep yourself on mute through the presentation, feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself, to ask a question. If there's any experiences you'd like to share around impact measurement, please feel free to post that in the chat too. If you have a question at the end, you can raise a real hand or a virtual hand, or if you don't want to ask the question yourself, just send me a wee message and I can ask it. Just a heads up, there will be a very, very, very short survey at the end that helps us evaluate these sessions. We'd be really grateful if you could just spend a couple of minutes to complete that. And also to confirm that we will share Emma's details and the presentation following the session also. So I guess as most of you will know, we're now running 4 light touch thematic workshops around health and wellbeing, employability, sport and activity and community spaces. They are open to any social enterprise of any size at any stage of their development to join, and they're free also to join, and a great way to connect. I'll put the link to join if you're not already signed up in the chat later. So we ran a number of thematic meetings back in July, and the people who attended those kind of gave us a wish list of things that they would like to hear more about and would like to kind of dive a bit deeper into, I guess. So social impact measurement was one of those things, and we have a couple of other sessions coming up around community asset transfer, and also around marketing, taking a kind of question time format. So it's where you can get all your burning marketing issue questions answered. So I guess that's the kind of context to where this session originated from. And we know social impact measurement is so important to social enterprises anyway, and also equally tricky sometimes to get your head around. So the basic format today is that we have Emma Liddell with us, who will give a short presentation covering what it is, why it matters, where to start, and I guess some tips and learning along the way. I don't want to embarrass Emma, but I don't think that we could have had a better speaker today. Emma's been supporting organisations to measure their social impact for over 10 years. And we reckon she's worked with at least 300 organisations in that time. One lot of apologies to give from our social enterprise speaker today, who had an emergency to deal with, so can't join us. And it just felt a bit last minute to kind of ask somebody else to speak, but it does give us more time for questions and discussion, and I guess we're always keen to hear your experiences and things that have worked for you that you would like to share. I guess these sessions are always an opportunity to kind of share knowledge and experience. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Emma, who's going to tell us all we need to know about impact measurement. Emma, over to you.
In half an hour. Hi, it's really nice to see you all. Some faces I recognise, some names I recognise. So hello to anyone I've worked with before. So this is absolutely a whistle stop. We're going to go through some whys and wherefores, and I've kept it really as practical as I can, because there's a lot of information on the slides, more than I would normally have. But I think given that you're going to get this as a follow-up PowerPoint, it just means you've got some useful information that you can look at in your own time. So yeah, as I said, I'm going to keep it really practical. Please do just think of any questions that you want to ask, and as Jane said, if you've got anything that you'd like to share, either in terms of well, I'm going to ask you about challenges in a minute actually, but also successes. I think we don't hear enough around impact measurement successes and different ways of doing things. I think also to say that we tend to get a little bit hung up. I think if I was I was paid £1 for every time people say we don't know how to do this and we're missing out on really important information. I think it's important not to panic. And actually, you do know what you're in the business of doing. You do know what the impact of that is. And if I had a conversation with you and anyone in your team, you'd be able to talk really with a lot of authority about actually the difference that you make in people's lives. So I think retrospective impact measurement and evaluation, it can be a really useful thing. The most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is knowing what you're in the business of doing, having really clear outcomes about that, and being consistent in how you're gathering evidence against those. But I'll talk about more about that as we go along. I'm just going to leap in because we've got a lot to cover. If at any point there's any issues, you can't hear me or you don't understand something, then please do jump in if you just need me to clarify something in that moment. Otherwise, I'll get to your questions at the end. So yes, I was asked to pull together a masterclass, and I'm not quite sure what's the difference between a masterclass and a workshop is, but it makes me feel very grandiose that I'm offering you a masterclass today. But basically, it will be some hopefully useful tips. So here we go. So today we will cover why should we measure our social, community, and environmental impact. What's the problem we're solving, which is where I always start, and often the place that people or organisations might forget to go back to. We're in an ever-changing, ridiculously fast-changing world, so I think being able to have some time to reflect on actually why are we here is a very, very important thing to do. Writing smart outcomes, indicators for our outcomes. So we have some very soft outcomes and very human outcomes often within third sector. So it's how do we know that we're achieving those without it being all about numbers? Where do we get our evidence from? So looking at some different data collection methods. Embedding a reflective practice. So really important. I think Jayne and I were just discussing before you came along around there's obviously pressures around funding, and probably most people that's the reason why you're coming along. You've still got to demonstrate and prove to funders, which never goes away. But it's also about reflective practice, which is really, really important. It's like, what are we achieving? Is what we're doing working? How are we working together as a team? Do we all have shared understanding? A little bit just about what support there is, which again is changing, but I'll talk about more a bit about that at the end. I'll touch very briefly on creating a logic model or theory of change, which I think is a very useful tool for all organisations, just to really give the rationale of what you do. And there's an example there, so you can look at that in your own time, and there'll be time for questions, as Jayne said. So it'd be lovely to have introductions from everyone, but I know we don't have time for that. But I would like to just hear from anyone if they've got anything just now about what you find most challenging about self-evaluation, so measuring your social impact within your organisation, whether anyone just wants to give me an idea of what you're finding the most difficult. You weren't expecting to have to speak to me so soon, were you? Anyone want to offer a challenge?
There's a comment in the chat, Emma. Martin said objectives.
Objectives. Well, there's a word.
And I think Dan's added something as well. Can you see that?
Well, what I'm going to take from that is a bit around language. So the language that I use is outcomes, so the difference that you want to make, so setting your outcomes. I tend not to use objectives as particularly as language, but that tends to be more about the how you're going to do what it is that you're doing, and being more specific potentially around maybe targets or goals within that. And hopefully just by running through this, then we'll answer your question. But if not, then please ask it at the end. Anyone else want to throw anything in just now before we crack on? Ordinarily, I would put you into breakout groups to have slightly less intimidating conversation, but
I've got something.
Raymond.
Yeah, staff time and their understanding of how important it actually is to collect that data and pass it on.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Time usually comes up as the top thing that is lacking. I think that's always going to be true, isn't it, for really pretty much everything that we're doing. What I would say is that the understanding part is so important, because actually oftentimes we don't really know what we're supposed to be gathering, or how are we best using our time, or how are we building evaluation into the activities that we do. So if you look at it more as reflective practice, so it's around we're kind of working it out as we go along, what's working, what isn't working. But if you've got a system which means that you know what information it is that you need to gather, then hopefully that reduces down on that time. You can be more organized about it. And I would always encourage, and when I do one-to-one work, I get as many of the team involved as possible. And certainly if you've got someone who's doing fundraising, comms, you know, those roles that need that information, it's great for them to be part of the conversation. But you really want those who are the eyes and ears, and often that's volunteers. So it's thinking about how you can light touch, bring in the voice of your volunteers without getting them to fill in loads of forms or spreadsheets. So we'll touch on that a little bit as we go through. But absolutely, that's definitely one of the ones that's up there. Okay, I'm going to just crack on because I know we've got a lot to do. So why is it important that we measure our community and environmental impact? So to prove what we're doing is effective in changing something in the world for the better. So that's kind of a given. We want to know that it's actually working. Understand an ever-changing audience and learn what changes we can make to get even better results. Now, we've been pretty good in the third sector at using lived experience. I think that the term lived experience has become much more commonly used, and there's much higher expectation probably than ever that we've got that voice in there. There's been such a change in the world and how we do things, and particularly in people's mental health in particular, that we need to keep asking that question. We're also trying to get more diversity into the voices that we're hearing, and really understanding who our audience is, who our community is. Align our measurements with our organisation's strategy and the funding that we want to attract. So that often sits at the top. I'm always pushing for the reflective practice element of it, but realistically, we know that we need to prove that to improve our funding chances, but also organisation strategy. So your evaluation, your impact measurement, and your evidence should be that golden thread that really links with whatever your strategy is, your evaluation practice, the way that you communicate what it is that you do. So there should be a line that runs through and a consistency, which makes it more useful, actually. You don't want it just something that sits in a drawer, you do a one-off and then you've forgotten it now. And it's about how do you hold that within your whole sort of strategic activities. To help us create a shared culture and philosophy within the team. So I am big on getting the team all involved in this, actually it's about your values as an organisation. It starts with why are we here? What do we all believe in? How are we holding this vision together? Because it's really, really tough times for everyone. There's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of uncertainty about jobs and roles. And that whole kind of workforce welfare and development bit is incredibly important. So where this can sort of like help you all pull together in the same direction and celebrate what happens, because you're transforming lives here, saving lives oftentimes. And to showcase work for more effective marketing. So that whole thing about, we're doing this, we're making this change. People don't know what it is that we do. We don't know the massive impact that we're having, and how do we translate that evidence into marketing language. So a couple of slides on that later on as well. So I'm literally going to sort of take you through the process that I would normally do when I'm working with organizations or when I'm doing my workshops, but it will be in a very sort of quick whistle stop type way. So when we're working out the problem to solve, we kind of start off by going wide. So what are the circumstances or wider context of the problem? So for example, you might be working in an area of high unemployment, rural isolation, poverty, low education attainment, high in the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. These are sort of like, big high hitting areas where you might be contributing with others in that space to improve those things. But as single organizations, we can't claim to eradicate or potentially make a massive dent in any of these, but it's cause and effect. So there's some relevance about that. So think really about who is most affected by this, or who is or are your target groups. And I'll talk a bit more about this when we look at the logic model, because whilst you'll have those, your key beneficiaries, those that maybe, impact most directly through the work that you do, there's also other things you can look at around outcomes for volunteers. If you're working with other organizations, if you're supporting the public sector, might be local business, or might be the planet. So it's showing the entirety that you're kind of punching above your weight about where that network of support actually reaches. So that added value bit that all funders are wanting to see. So for example, here, something like being specific, long-term unemployed adults, older people, families, young adults with learning disabilities, girls and young women, or it could be community or environment, and thinking about in what ways are they affected. So more specifically, and this is the bit that an organisation would be dealing with, is things around lack of skills and self-worth, loneliness, poor money management, mental health, confidence, or it could be around the environment. So a good bit of practice to do. Oops, I'm just going to try to move your pictures over here so I can read this. So coming up with a problem statement that everyone can get behind. So in this case, I'm going to use an example that I'll run through with the rest of the slides. So West Lothian has higher than average unemployment, poor educational attainment, and families living in poverty. So that's the wider bit, the wider context. More specifically, a high proportion of school leavers lack qualifications, skills, and confidence for work or further education. Okay, so it's trying to be concise. That's the tough bit. Speaking at length is much easier, but actually being concise about it and being specific is much harder. So when we talk about outcomes, outcomes are the changes that happen as a result of your activities. And I think we get a little bit carried away with, we do this, and as a result of this, and, because we don't want to undersell ourselves. But actually, if you're going to measure it, being sort of concise and focused is really important. So these might include changes in behaviours, skills, attitudes, choices, physical and mental well-being, in actions, in your community, in the environment, or in practice and policy. So, where we'd really like to hit is, we've been throwing out this evidence for years, or, for however long you've been doing that. We want to know that it's going somewhere, that it's actually influencing in some way around practice and in particular on policy and where resources are put. So the example project I'm going to use today is Made Up Project. So Jobs for Us, working with 15 to 25-year-olds in West Lothian, delivering job club, one-to-one coaching and mentoring, and work placements. So in this case, there's the problem that I just read out for you. And what Jobs for Us provide, job club coaching and placements. So when you're writing your outcomes, and I don't know if this answers the question about objectives that someone threw up earlier, but looking at how you write outcomes, we think about who will change, what will change, and in what direction: less, more, improved, more able, better, reduced. And interestingly as well, when you think about language, it's very much around audience. So the preference generally is to use positive language, to use more strength-based, asset-based language. So rather than reducing isolation, we might be increasing social connections. And the lottery certainly led the way in that kind of language. But I would always say, be looking at, if you're seeking funding, match their language and show that you are contributing directly to whatever outcomes they are looking for. So particularly when it comes to things like local authority funding or government, they might be using slightly different language. So in this case, our who is school leavers. They'll have more confidence in themselves and their abilities, have increased skills for work, and have greater direction and motivation. So I like to be able to tell a little bit of a story, because you're looking about a story of change. And it's not just about, I'm coming along, I'm getting skills, and I'm out the door. Because we're looking at school leavers here who maybe been failed by the school system. So there's something about what's the quality of your relationship with those young people that enables them to keep coming back. So actually that first outcome might be quite relational, and don't undersell that whole bit around making people feel valued, heard, when maybe they're not feeling that anywhere else. So tells that story, but also we're looking for a bit of an exit outcome. That might not be true for all of you, it depends on the nature of your work, but looking for something which means that you're skilling people up to walk through life with. So it's that give a man a fish or teach them to fish type philosophy. One way to actually really pull out those outcomes and to be specific is think about what's the problem and therefore what is the positive opposite. So there's no rocket science here. If it's low confidence in themselves, abilities, more confidence in. If there's no skills, increased skills, no direction, greater direction and motivation. It's just quite a useful discipline, rather than coming up with 25 different outcomes. What are the main problems we're dealing with that people are showing up with, and therefore we need to create the positive opposite. And I just want to give you a different example, because many of you or some of you might be working with organisations or doing business support or a community trust or something like that, where you might not be working with the end beneficiary, But in this case, again, these are things that I've made up, all of that might actually exist. But community organisations in rural Clackmannanshire who work with vulnerable people are facing increasing pressure in terms of funding and need. So they provide business and development support to local community organisations. So in this case, our WHO is community organisations, and they want those to be sustainable, working collaboratively and effectively with other local services to improve lives. So in this case, community organisations feel more supported and confident, increase business and development skills, and clearer direction, sustainable strategy, which essentially is really what we did before with the young people, but it's on an organisational level. So what are those issues? What are some of the things that people are bringing along as human issues, as well as those around skills? Okay, so writing indicators for our outcomes, how you know that positive change is happening. So we were talking about increased confidence there. So that's quite a difficult one to measure in itself. You just say, do you feel more confident? That could mean a number of things. So we kind of need to break it down into hard and soft indicators. So things that you can count, things that are a little bit more woolly. So examples of hard indicators would be getting a job, sustaining a tenancy, stopping medication, or gaining a certificate. Soft indicators might be more around being able to manage emotions. We're looking for examples of that. Smiling or giving eye contact. So what do we hear? What do people tell us? But also, what are we seeing? So a lot of the activity that we do, we're actually observing change, and people who are benefiting from that aren't necessarily able to articulate that themselves or even necessarily recognize that. So it's about building things into the activity or your support activity, if that's what you do. Could be around initiating conversation or using I statements like, I feel happy, I feel less stressed, I'm able to do X, Y, and Z now. And just to break that down a little bit further, so once you have worked out what your outcomes are, so what's the problem, what's our outcome, and therefore what it looks like is, so in this case, we've got the harder ones or more tangible ones around they have a CV, they've gained a qualification, or they secured work or volunteering. Tick, 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 and say, yes, we've done that as a result and coming along. But they might tell you either written or verbal, and that could be conversationally, it could be in a survey, it could be in a number of different ways. But using I statements is quite a good way of stepping into it. It's almost like that, what's the customer journey, what's the beneficiary's journey, what is commonly heard or seen. So I have routine and structure, I can work well with others, I'm able to learn and enjoy it. So that's what having increased skills means to them. But what you might observe is that they can apply a new skill, presentable in appearance, and engaging in sharing ideas. So you've got three quite different sets of indicators there, and it's just a useful way of thinking in a slightly more 360 way about what do we mean when we've got this outcome. So where do we get our information from? There's only finite places that you can get it from. So the obvious one is that your service users or members will tell you, written, verbal, formal, informal. So whatever method it is that you're using, we'll get round to various methods after this. But because if someone tells you something, it is legitimate evidence. Obviously, there's things around permissions, but there's ways of like, how do we gather some of that stuff with more stealth, if you like, that we're just around it all the time. Other people tell you, so much kind of third-party evidence. This is a really useful one to get if you can. So professionals, family, peers, because it's not you as an organisation saying it. It's not someone who may feel either not confident to say what they feel or feeling grateful for the service they've got and don't really want to say otherwise. Observation, really, really underused, I think, with observation. I think as long as you've been consistent with it, and I've got an example of how to capture that later on, that's a really important one, because you know the people that you work with better than anyone else, and you know what change looks and feels like. Hard evidence, the tangible changes. So these are your outputs. So if we want to get into a bit of language, your outputs, your statistics, your tangibles, your hard evidence, the stuff that you can count. And also something which I really, really encourage all of you to use where it feels relevant and you're able to do so is look at what research backs up what it is that you do. Because chances are whatever it is that you're doing, someone else is doing it somewhere else. There's been some academic research on it potentially. It could be around lived experience. That could come from podcasts. It could come from what are thought pieces, what's been in the press, and statistics you can get from things like Scottish government websites. So where is the information that's already out there that backs up what it is that you have? So you can see we've got this kind of mosaic of different types of data. If you were just doing observation on its own, that might be not strong enough. If it was just external research, but you're backing it up with triangulating, if you like, from various different sources as best you can. So I'm going to fly through some methods. And as I said, apologize for having so many words on the screen, but you can look at this in your own time, but I've got some examples for you as well. So we'll start with the more obvious and the more conventional. So we've got the survey or questionnaire. So best used for adults and young people with good literacy skills. And, obviously using SurveyMonkey or other digital forms of feedback is useful, particularly for professionals and busy people. So really just don't be asking what you don't need to ask. Keep them to a minimum. And most importantly, and I'll bang this drum over and over, if you have outcomes, you want to be asking questions that relate to your outcomes. So the usual thing is to go for a satisfaction survey. That's the most common. And yes, those are important questions to be asking, but it doesn't necessarily tell you about change. So, and you might often get a lot of, we thoroughly enjoyed that, or that was really helpful at the end. And then good to know, but what changes are you looking? So minimal effort for relatively high return of information, but not necessarily high return of those questionnaires. So sometimes, 10, 20% can be good. So the more that you can engage in different ways and encourage different types of voices as well. That's the most important thing. So let me give you an example. Okay, so I always encourage, think about what your outcome is. So I have new skills that help me to find work. That would be increased life skills for work, or increased or improved self-confidence. So either using a question that relates specifically to that, or a statement. Statements can be quite helpful because it focuses the mind, because people will go, well, do I? I have new life skills that help me to find work. Strongly agree, not sure, or no, or don't agree. So again, using language rather than numbers. I think scoring with numbers can be quite confusing, can be more difficult to analyze. And even if you've got a little key there of 10 is high and 1 is low, sometimes people get that the wrong way around. And you don't really want to be going back to people saying, did you really mean that you had a bad time? So keep it as simple as you can, not too many options. I've kind of avoided having 5 because people will quite often just go for the middle one. We'll all know ourselves what we're like when we fill out forms. So just be thinking, if we're going to do this, let's make it really, really useful. What you can also do is you'll get a percentage from that, but underneath that, you want, as best you can, you want some of that more qualitative information. So tell us more about that and give us examples if you can. Examples are great, aren't they? So we did this, I've taken this away, I've applied it elsewhere. So 85% of the school leavers we support said they strongly agreed that their confidence had improved. Well, that's a great metric to have. That in itself tells a huge story, but also to tell a little bit more of the story of experience for those young people that are coming along. I've always felt stupid in school and that I'd never be able to find work that I could enjoy. I realize now that I do have strengths and feel more confident to use them. I mean, it's almost like a little case study in itself. And this is the hearts and minds bit. It's good to have the numbers, but if you can engage people in actually what is this experience, it tells a little bit more about what you do, what happens, and what that means. The focus group, I love a focus group. I think it's a really, really great way to get a lot of information where people will bounce off each other. You can seek out the less heard as well as the more vocal. Think about how you structure that. So it might be that you have smaller groups, but also be really careful around making sure that you're practically capturing things. You're enabling people to lend their voice in some way. You've got enough people in the room for somebody to facilitate these things, but someone else to scribe that. Obviously recording if that is something that is appropriate. But it's a good use of time. In half an hour, you can get a lot of information and people will bounce off each other. And you can dig deeper into responses as well to find out a little bit more if you're not getting quite what you need. So some of the cons in that might be that you get the louder voices, you get the people who want to come along, give those opinions, but that's probably true of a lot of evaluation practice. So we need to think about other ways, and we'll look at more creative stuff in just a minute. So just again, to give an example of what information you'd get. So we invited 12 of our clients from a mixture of backgrounds to a focus group and asked the questions relating to our 3 key outcomes. So school leavers will have increased skills, confidence, and direction and motivation for work. So they can give specific answers around that. So you now have specific evidence. During the discussions, we captured their responses on flip chart and learned 10 out of 12 agreed that they had improved significantly in all 3. 1 had found it hard to make all the sessions due to caring responsibilities, and 1 had improved slightly but admitted to not understanding some of the language in our resources. Good intelligence, if you're asking for information, you also need to do something with it. So in this case, as a result of this focus group, we have reviewed the language used to ensure it meets plain language and access standards, and we've also changed our initial assessment to make sure we check any barriers to attending. So we're all learning, right? We don't get it all right from the start, but we do want to know. And if you are reporting to funders, something that they're going to be keen to know is they said we did. We're listening to the people who matter most, and we're implementing those changes. We're a learning organisation. We're a reflective organisation, and this is what it looks like when we're listening to the people we support. So observation, as I said, I think this is very underused, captured in different ways. End of activity notes. So if you are doing any kind of activity or event, is there a way that you can bring people together to say, what did we see today? What was some of our noticings that we had? So it can be used for most activities, a lot of activities, particularly useful when working with adults or young people who have barriers to responding either verbally or in written form. It might be English not a first language, could be cultural, could be learning disability, could be working with very, very young children. So how do we capture that? When it comes to doing this, you do need to discipline yourselves and have something in place that makes it easy for you to capture some of those observations, but also not to get too caught up in, we have to make note of everything all of the time. You're sampling here, you're showing what is common. No one's going to come chapping at your door and saying, we want proof of every single change that's happened to every single person that's come through your doors. That is not practical. So common sense has to prevail here as well. Okay. So here's my example spreadsheet. This is just a really simple Excel spreadsheet, but you could do your own. There's Google Forms, there's all sorts of software that's out there at the moment that is there to sort of support you in recording information. Often things like management systems can be helpful, but it's only as good as the information that you put in there. So again, you might just want to make sure that you're getting more of that qualitative information. And if it means do something just straightforward, like a simple spreadsheet, then sometimes that's an easier way to hold on to that information. And you can have different tabs for different activities or different sources of information. But this example here is for our job club. So we've got a comment or observation. So before coming here, I didn't even like leaving the house. I'm using public transport regularly now and quite fancy looking into jobs in caring. Okay, so that's a useful quote picked up from someone, either spoken or written down. We've got under our outcome column, that's a drop down menu. So you would literally just tick. So rather than worrying about, I have to look for examples of people being more confident or building their skills, what you're doing is you're looking for where change is happening, or someone said something which indicates that something is changing for the better for them, or you're observing something. You can go back to it later and say, well, actually, that comment there relates to feeling more confident and a great sense of motivation and direction. So in that one statement, we're hitting on 2 outcomes. And below, again, there's an observation there, and that relates to increased skills for work. So when you export your report from this, you've got your outcomes, and each little bit of noticing or comments are grouped together underneath those outcomes. So it's a good way. This is your kind of monitoring tool, if you like. There's also a baseline column. So if that feels like useful to do, because what you're showing is distance traveled, isn't it? So what's the difference? How do people turn up? How do they present in the first instance? And we don't always know that about people, and kind of nor should we. It's in building those relationships and then coming along that you start to get a bit more of an understanding of where their starting point was. So in this case, they were presenting as extremely shy, with low confidence and no idea about what they wanted to do. So that's a huge bit of progress. It also helps in you thinking, well, would they make for a good case study? And permissions as well. So that's really down to you and your policies around how you use information and being really transparent about that. So on the subject of case studies, this is Harry. Now, I would really advise, if you're going to do a case study, then make it purposeful, build it around your outcomes, and there's a beginning, middle, and an end. You're showing that what was true for someone, what happened along the way, and where are they now, or at the point of them not being supported by you anymore. So in this case, we've got Harry, lost his wife, Margaret, early last year. They'd been married for 47 years and had no family close by. He and his wife just had each other, apart from the odd visit from their son. So when Harry first came to the hub, he was low, feeling very lost, and his health was suffering. With a bit of encouragement, he started to come along to the men's shed sessions and got increasingly involved with our gardening project. So now at the age of 83, he's become a most faithful volunteer, clearly in better physical and mental health, and everyone at the hub knows and loves him. He looks out for the younger volunteers. And nice picture, nice quote. If you told me this time last year I could start a new life, I wouldn't have believed you. After I lost Margaret, I thought it was all over. She would have loved it here. It's been a pleasure to get to know and support others who have their own troubles. So really, you know, with what's probably less than 100 words there, you're telling a really strong story, a beginning, middle, and end, and a nice picture. So if you're going to be doing reports, where possible, if you're able to really breathe some life into that, it's kind of hearts and minds as well as that evidence. I'm conscious of time, and so I'm sorry for rattling through this. Some creative methods, so using ways that people can lend their voice in different ways: graffiti walls, smiley faces, emojis, vision boards. If you're doing any kind of creative activity or physical activity, how can you build some of that in so it's actually a fun way of giving some kind of feedback? It can be just something really quick as well. You know, a show of hands will still give you a percentage. Can you hop on the back of things like Mental Health Awareness Day, International Women's Day? Where are things happening anywhere where people can sort of lend their voice and be part of a conversation? I use pictures a lot. Oftentimes people feel that they're not necessarily able to answer a question, but they're given something else. It uses a different part of the brain. So you can ask a question, when you think about coming to this group, which picture would you choose? How does it make you feel? And you'll see underneath there, they can pick a different picture for various different reasons. So again, tells a story. So if you're going to use a method, you need to describe why you're using that method. So you might be saying, well, we can't use conventional questionnaires, so we need to do things in more creative ways, and the reasons being, but what we are hearing and seeing are these things. We've got scoring tools. Some of you may be aware of those, often used for things around employability programs or mental health. You can put your outcomes at the end of each of those spokes, and it's a kind of a beginning along the way and towards the end, so you can actually see a visual picture of how you're changing in different directions. Again, if you're going to do some kind of evaluation, it doesn't have to be a boring set of questions. Try and make it a little bit more interesting, and it could be something quite simple. So if you don't need loads of information, but you just need to get a flavour of how people found something, then keep it light touch. So just try and match what you're doing, so it's proportionate to your activity. So as that Raymond's question around embedding reflective practice, think about how you actually keep this on the agenda. So I would really encourage you, if you're going to try and build in some evaluation, I usually start with values. It's a nice place to start. So what is it that we all believe in? It's not just something that we did 3 years ago and it's sat in a drawer and actually we've got no clue what our values are. You can really get underneath it, because people will use language like inclusion or resilience, or words that have become buzzwords in our sector. But I would really encourage you to think about, what do we mean by that, and can we use some different language around that? If you're going to put in evaluation, you need to be looking at it at team meetings. I wouldn't say every team meeting, maybe once every 2-3 months, have that on the agenda as a focus. Keep high up the agenda. What have we put in place? Is it working? What evidence are we getting? What is this telling us? Things like support and supervision, where you have those conversations where staff feel that they're actually adding value, or where they've had impact, and just keeping it alive. Use it for celebration. Again, I was saying to Jayne earlier on, just going along to teams where people are burning out, where it's difficult to show up every day. Sometimes you forget while you're there because it's just crisis management so much of the time. But actually, when you do take the time to look back and see the amazing work that you've done, yeah, I think it does have a great impact on the staff and remind you why you're there. And for volunteers too, absolutely, showing their contribution. So I just wanted to give you an example of using your evidence within your marketing. So this is an example of Spark, who were formerly Craig's Hill Good Neighbourhood. So they wanted to rebrand as something that sounded a little bit more interesting and engaging. So they used their name Spark to create their key messages. So that, again, this is something you could do as a team. What is it we want to say about ourselves? What do we want people's experience when they come along? And that should match with your outcomes. So here we've got spark your curiosity and be welcomed with open arms, spark new friendships, spark new skills and talents, spark your unique self and self-confidence, spark your health and happiness, and your potential and contribution to the world. So it really gives a nice rounded, these are the sorts of things that you can experience coming along. When I worked with Spark, we came up with 8 outcomes and I aligned those to their key messages. So as I said before, what's your strategy? What are you saying you're intending to do? Are your outcomes matching that? What are we saying about ourselves? How do we communicate in a way? It's the bloke in the pub test. You're not going to sit in there and say, well, we increase the confidence of young people in blah, 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 blah. You know, you'll say it in a much more kind of friendly way. So what's going to engage people, encourage people to come along, or for you to communicate what it is that you do? This is an evaluation plan, so you can look at this if it's something that you wanted to have a go at yourselves. So against each of the outcomes, we've got the indicators, so the examples I showed earlier of how to actually identify your indicators. So that gives examples of what's meant by that, which again is a combination of those tangibles observed and what you're being told. And then the various different methods, they wanted to have the so they've got the session notes, they've got the monitoring, question of the week, something on the wall. So keep it alive. If you keep evaluation alive, keep asking different questions, chuck it into your social media. If you've got a space, put it on the wall. If you're bored by what you're doing, then other people are as well. So get creative if you can. Just another example of a yoga studio that I worked with, and they used Maslow's hierarchy as a way of working through their development in the yoga practice. So we just populated their outcomes onto that because that made sense to them and made a really nice visual for those that were coming along and what they could expect. Very quickly going to rattle through. So are we okay for time, Jayne?
Oh, we're coming up to 1:45, Emma.
Okay.
So we've got 15 minutes left.
Okay, that's fine. Got time for questions, that's fine. I'm just going to run through this then. So I don't know if any of you have come across a logic model or theory of change, but it's usually my starting point with most organizations. And some of this we've already covered. So actually, if you're doing the work of looking at the problem you're trying to solve, looking at your stakeholder mapping, so who else is benefiting from the work that you do, and I really, really encourage you to communicate that, because it's not just your immediate beneficiaries most of the time. Partners, stakeholders, really important to include that in your logic model as well, because funders will be looking for where you're working well with others. It's been something in the third sector we've often struggled with because of the funding culture, really. You know, it's not surprising that happens, but it's kind of our clients, our funding, and actually the more that you can demonstrate there's good referral routes, good referral pathways, that there's stronger partnership and joined up working, then it's more power to your arm. So the different activities, so why you do what you do, who for, who else is working in that space and supporting what you do, what is it that you do, your output, so what you count, participants, sales, events, resources, volunteer hours, things that you can cost up actually. And then you've got your short to medium term outcomes, so those that examples that we looked at earlier in the job club, but then looking at your longer term. So your short to medium term are your outcomes that you are proving. You are putting evidence against those, so you know that you are achieving those. Going into the long term is more your sort of strategic vision land, so maybe 5 to 10 years, whatever makes sense to you in terms of a future length of time. A really good thing to do with the board. So if you pull this together, this is your roadmap, this is your kind of gold standard, which is what you're doing, but it can also be aspirational. So it's quite a good way of working out, we've got this other thing that we want to be working on, so let's work it through in this sort of theory of change type thinking. Who will benefit in what ways? And longer term, what this means is that we will be achieving these wider outcomes for community. Again, maybe getting into that influencing space. And all of that then feeds into policy land. So what local, national, even international policies are we contributing towards? A really helpful snapshot of how not only do you know what you're dealing with, who's going to most benefit from that, what you can prove, but also where you're contributing the long term and how you are helping others, either commissioners, policymakers, funders meet their own outcomes as well. So like I said, good to work with sort of, you know, senior level, more strategic level, working with your boards, helping everyone get on the same page. You could do this piece of work with them if that's something they're interested in. But also, you know, at this particular moment in time when boards are having to think about how to keep organizations sustainable, you can also test that, thinking, well, what affecting factors are there, both positively and negatively? So what opportunities do we have available to us at the moment? What are some of our strengths, but what do we need to be mindful of? So if we're going to be putting our energies or resources or funding into any particular area, what do we need to be forecasting for? And maybe something around succession planning there as well. Now, I've got an example here. I'm not going to read through any of this because there's an awful lot of information, but I just thought it'd be useful for you to see the sorts of things that I pull together with my clients. And within the problem need bit, you've got lots of different links in there. So if you remember back to me saying, if you're able to bring in outside evidence or research or statistics that back up what you're saying is that problem, then you're getting stronger evidence of why it's important. So the more that you can show real authority on that, you know what it is that your ask is, the better. So lots of information in there. And then you'll see here, we've got different beneficiary groups. So we've got the members that the pantry supports, but there's also children and young people. So there's particular outcomes for them. Volunteers and trainees, they're also benefiting. Community partners benefiting, local suppliers are, and also the environment. So that's a lot of benefit. Really important just to lay that out. Okay, so you can look at that in your own time. So just quickly, just to say what support there is. This is actually, you've caught me on my last day of working for Social Value Lab, so unfortunately I'm not going to be able to do the work through Just Enterprise anymore. And as it is, the Just Enterprise program is changing slightly. So we are moving more to different sort of digital and AI solutions. That's all in review at the moment. So I've put info at Social Value Lab on there if you wanted to get in touch with the organisation that I work for. We also support the Just Enterprise program. So there are some free resources. At the moment, I can't tell you what those are going to be because it's literally in process just now. But I've also put in the link to the Just Enterprise application there, so you can have a read in your own time and find out a little bit more about what that offer is going to be. And I've just very cheekily as well, if you do want to get in touch with me, I'm moving on as a freelancer, so I'd be very happy to hear from anyone if anyone wants any sort of further conversation beyond this. So I realise I have rattled through this at a pace, and hopefully that's been of some use.
Great. Thanks very much, Emma.
Back in the room.
Thank you. You have covered an awful lot of ground there. So thank you for that. I think there's a lot of good practice in there, a lot of good tips that people can take on board for their own impact measurement. I think it's quite important to say also, you choose what you measure and you choose how you measure it and how you capture that information. So to a degree, how complex or otherwise your impact measurement is, it is down to kind of your decisions around those sorts of things. So, you know, sometimes I think people want to measure absolutely everything, and that's not always practical or possible given capacity. So yes, thanks, Emma. I'm conscious of the time. So I guess open to questions from people. I've noted the questions before. If you feel your questions weren't answered, please just jump in now. So just a real hand or a virtual hand and we'll bring you in. Or if there's anything you want to share about what you've done that you think might be helpful for the group, we're always keen to hear that as well. So over to you. I guess, and you kind of touched on this a wee bit, Emma, I'm going to bring in one of the questions that was asked earlier. So you've got the kind of direct impact on your beneficiary community, whatever that looks like. But what about the ripple effect, the wider effect? So if you're looking to kind of affect system change, how do you demonstrate that?
So I think the reason I include the logic model is because at least you can lay out the logic of that. So even if it's quite difficult to get all of the evidence on that, you can demonstrate how you're working with who and what you can reasonably assume are those outcomes. But it's horses for courses in terms of if you're working with other professionals, for example, it might be that literally setting aside half a day to pick up the phone and ask consistent questions might be the best way. Putting out a quick survey monkey just to get that kind of information back. If you're working with volunteers, you know, you've kind of got a captive audience, but the best way might be to just get everyone together and have a conversation. In terms of things like where you're trying to raise awareness, for example, that's one that comes up time and time again, because you don't directly know necessarily who's receiving that information. And so there's a little bit of kind of like scanning. So it might be, if it's in the political landscape, you might start to see things showing up in some of the conversations around policy and policy change. It may be that you're looking at social media and what are some of the trends around, you know, change around that. You know, what are your networks and where are you seeing that? It's, yeah, when it comes to the information bit, it's quite difficult. But again, I would say, you know, focus groups can be incredibly useful. You know, if you've got a strong social media presence, then be asking those questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Put it out there and see what comes back. It's looking at all of your vehicles for communication and what's going to be best suit who in terms of those questions, and just trying to be as broad as possible. But I think particularly when you're trying to prove a negative or if you're doing preventative work, it's difficult to then go, oh, well, would that have happened if we hadn't done this? You can ask those questions, but I think we also, there has to be that common sense bit as well of that, you know, if you're keeping people out of public services, for example, then clearly that is saving the public purse and the burden on services.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's bringing that wider impact in, isn't it? You know, in terms of, yes, you're helping individuals or communities or the environment, but actually it stretches way beyond that. Okay. I've got another question in the chat around, what are your views on attempting to monetize your social impact?
To monetize your social impact? Could whoever asked that just...
Jennifer, do you want to pop?
Yeah.
Come on. Do you want to come in?
Sorry, I'm trying to find the button to unmute myself. Thanks, Emma. That was really useful. Yeah, just in terms of, I'm a creative director of a architecture and design and research practice, and there's very few of us that are social enterprises, but we do a lot of work that has a lot of social impact potential, at least. And I've been doing some research on lots of different ways to try and measure the impact. And the RBA, which is our professional body, actually released a social value toolkit. And they suggested using surveying and actually using some figures from the social bank to try and allocate money towards, so that you can speak in terms of a financial impact or equate it to. So that's what I mean by that.
Yes, so it's that kind of social return on investment bit, is like, how do we put a financial value against social outcomes? Yeah, no, absolutely. And Jennifer, I'm getting asked this all the time, and increasingly for obvious reasons, because the added value is. So there's no easy fix on that one. I mean, Social Value Lab actually do social return on investments, but it can be quite costly and very time consuming. So for any small organization, I wouldn't encourage them necessarily to go down that route. It should really be for larger organizations or intermediaries or themed bodies, really, to be helping you with these metrics. But there are those metrics out there. Sometimes you have to scout around a little bit. You've got things like Social Value Engine. There's things that you can pay for, which is software that will help you with that kind of formula of, if we put all of this information in, then it will spit out a kind of figure. So there are mechanisms for doing that. On a light touch kind of way, things that you can do are, there's information out there around things like keeping people out of a hospital bed, or how much it would cost to keep someone in a hospital bed or in prison, or, you know, out of other public services, getting them into work. So therefore they're now contributing to the economy, and they're moving away from the benefit system. So there are some sort of metrics out there that you can borrow. It's rarely going to be a really scientific thing where you can give an actual figure. Totally is saying that this is the cost, and we are working with X amount of people, so therefore you can pretty much, you know, do that calculation. Things like volunteer if your volunteers are contributing to what the workforce will be doing. You can cost those up, and certainly the number of hours. So in that whole kind of outputs bit in your logic model, it's like, you know, what can we cost up? What can we put a cost against? And if you feel that's something that's going to help you with your argument, particularly to get in either funding or to get more people involved, then absolutely, why not? I think we're moving more and more in that direction. So the more savvy you can get around that, the better. I think we were going to be doing a bit of work with one of the TSIs. So I think looking at sort of, you know, TSIs, your social enterprise support, you know, where maybe you can get some help in looking at, can you get resourcing around this? Can we try and get some research around this? Where can we go to one place where we can have that bank of information? So at the moment, it's a little bit scattered. Information is out there, but that answers your question. But
oh, Emma, you froze just for a fraction there, but I think we kind of got the gist. Jennifer, was that excellent? Right here. Thanks very much. Okie dokie. Does anyone have one final question that they'd like to jump in with? I'm going to post a couple of things in the chat. First of all, it's the Social Enterprise Network sign-up form. If you haven't, the evaluation that I mentioned earlier in the chat as well, but I'm a little embarrassed to share this with you now, having heard what Emma's just said, but here we go. There we go. That should work, hopefully. So no further burning questions. Rightio. I've got a couple of plugs from Social Enterprise Scotland point of view. One is hot off the press. It is our AGM on the 7th of October, but we're also doing a deep dive into the 2024 Social Enterprise Census as part of the AGM as well. So it's kind of looking at the detail behind the figures, I guess, of the recently launched census. So that's up on our events page on the website. And we currently have our Social Enterprise Awards celebration event live as well, which I think is the November posh frocks on sort of event. And we'd love to see some of you there to help us celebrate, you know, how wonderful the sector is. I'll pop that in the chat just now. But otherwise, I think I will, all that remains for me to say is another big thank you to Emma on her last day as well, which we didn't realise when we arranged this session. Honestly, it's been fabulous. So thank you very much. I hope you've seen the lovely comments in the chat and the lovely emojis across the screen.
Yeah,
so thank you very much. And thank you all for coming along. We'll send information, follow-up information out to you, hopefully later this week. If you need to catch up on the session, it is recorded, so you can catch it on our YouTube channel. Otherwise, yeah, thanks very much for coming along, and see you all soon, hopefully.